Good morning, good morning, good morning, church. I hope that this message finds you well. It is another beautiful day. Even though the weather might not be cooperating with us, it's still a day that God has made. And I am truly thankful and appreciative for this day. I want to just touch base real quick with where I left off from last week and talking about, as Peter had put it, some cleverly devised myths, certain stories that were being spread around. Um, the early church had, even right away, the apostles had to combat false teaching and false teachers. You see, upon the Great Commission, when Jesus had sent them out, one of the things that he had sent them to do specifically was to, in Matthew chapter 28, chapter 28, verse 20 says, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. The context of Jesus being with them was in the context of fulfilling the Great Commission. One of that last parts of it says, that they're going to be teaching other people to observe all of the things that Jesus had taught them, and this keeping this right teaching. I heard this saying one time and it stuck with me. It says, orthodoxy leads to orthopraxy. Orthodoxy leads to orthopraxy. So right teaching or right believing leads to right behaving or right practice. And I know for in my personal life where I don't have right practice, it's because I either have a twisted belief or skewed belief. Right away in the early church, the apostles had to deal with people who would twist their teachings. Now, there's several different types of misteaching out there, and one of the ones that I want to talk with you today is one that has enough truth or is true, but has twisted. And then that's where it becomes a falsity. So it's not something that's just a completely false or completely made up. It has just enough truth in it to appear to give the illusion of truth. But it's when we twist it, or it's when it's twisted, that's when it becomes a lie or a problem. We're going to look at several verses from 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy. One of the early heresies that the church was combating was Gnosticism. Gnosticism comes from the Greek word gnosis. It means knowledge, and Gnosticism was this hidden knowledge, this secretive knowledge, and you had to be either enlightened to come across it, or be exposed to this secret teaching. But that was the real truth, and the early church had to combat a specific type of Gnosticism that was talking about that all matter and all flesh was evil, and what you necessarily did with your body was irrelevant. I don't want to go too far into that, but I want to talk and show how how Paul had to combat this as he was coaching Timothy, a person that he was teaching how to teach, a person he was teaching how to lead. And this one specific name comes up a couple of times in the teachings of Paul to Timothy as this person being a false teacher. And as we look, we'll see what was his false teaching that he was giving. So 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 18 says this charge I entrust to you, Timothy, my child, in accordance to the prophecies previously made about you, that by them you may wage a good warfare, holding faith and a good conscience. By rejecting this, some made a shipwreck of their faith, among whom are Hymenaeus and Alexander, who I have handed over to Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme. You see that this in verse 19 where it says, holding faith and a good conscience. By rejecting this, some have made shipwreck their faith. Paul was expecting Timothy to hold the faith. To what was the faith? The faith would have been the teachings that Paul would have been giving to Timothy, in this orthodoxy. All right, this right teaching, this right believing that's going to lead to right behaving. The people who rejected the correct teaching, people like Hymenaeus and Alexander, they took just enough of the truth, and then they went out and taught other people of it, and they ended up shipwrecking their faith. But in process of shipwrecking their faith, it ended up hurting and affecting other people. In church as a whole right now, there are several different micro teachings that become big and end up shipwrecking the teacher's faith, but also the faith of others. Several years ago, there was a person, this one pastor that I had really looked up to. I'll just say the name, Rob Bell. And Rob Bell was known for his Pneuma videos, and it was so creative and such a great teacher. But as time went on, he took a true statement, a true thing of God's love and God's forgiveness, but he had skewed it in such a way in which he basically erased attempted to erase the doctrine of hell and of eternity. Now, that was, I think it's a great example. There's a great book by Francis Chan called Erasing Hell, and that is Francis Chan's response basically to that heretical teaching by Rob Bell. If you don't know about it, look it up. It's some interesting stuff. But I remember during the time I was so involved with it because there was other Christians who were reading Rob Bell's book, and it was really affecting and changing their belief of eternity, their belief of hell, their belief of reward, their belief of being eternally separated from God. And I spent a lot of time dealing with and working with and trying to bring orthodoxy back to some of those people that were in my circle. If we look over to 2 Timothy chapter 2, we'll kind of see what Hymenaeus's what his blasphemy was, what his misteaching was. As we had just read from 1 Timothy, Paul says he handed them over to Satan so that they would learn not to blaspheme. And that's what he was expecting, that they would come to their senses, that they would be so far into the dirt and so far into the mud that they'd come to the senses the same way that the prodigal son came to his senses as he was eating out of this pig's trough. He's like, wow, I could have, been in my father's house and been a servant. The servants eat better than this. He was expecting them to go through enough pain to come to their senses. As we see in 2 Timothy, that wasn't the case. He did not end up coming to his senses, but in fact, he recruited more people to his cause. One of his first main teachers was Hymenaeus and Alexander. This next person he has is Philetus. We're going to read in 2 Timothy chapter 2, starting at verse 16. It says this: "But avoid irrelevant babble, for it will lead people into more and more ungodliness, and their talk will spread like gangrene or cancer. Among them are Hymenaeus and Philetus, who have swerved from the truth, saying that the resurrection has already happened. They are upsetting the faith of some. But God's firm foundation stands, bearing this seal: the Lord knows those who are his. Let everyone who names the name of the Lord depart from iniquity." You see, the one of the things that he was doing was he took the truth of the resurrection. The resurrection is a true thing that will happen, but he had twisted it to say that it already happened. It's not an outright denial of the resurrection. It's not a blasphemy or a lie or a misteaching say doesn't exist, but he's saying it already had happened because he was a Gnostic. He was downplaying the role of the body in eternity, downplaying the role of what we do with our physical selves and elevating what we do with our spiritual selves. And it was just reading it, it might say like, okay, what's the big deal? All right. It doesn't sound that terrible, but as it was bad enough for Paul to address this several times. It was bad enough for Paul to reach out to Timothy and say, correct these teachings. Don't be like them. These people's words are like cancer. These people's words are like gangrene where it just rots the body. And I want to say that for me personally, I haven't taken some misteachings that seriously. I haven't taken the things that twisted things or twisted truths that I personally believe and stumble with and stumble across seriously. And I should take those things seriously, because as Paul had encouraged Timothy in verse 19, but God's firm foundation stands, bearing this seal: the Lord knows those who are his. Let everyone who names the name of the Lord depart from iniquity. And going back, orthodoxy leads to orthopraxy. And where I haven't departed from iniquity, it's because I haven't departed, or it's because I have had a departation from orthodoxy, right teaching, that has not led to my right behaving. So I want to encourage us. Let us be challenged. Let us be pricked. Let us take God's word seriously, and let us invite God to correct, to expose the areas of our lives that is, as Paul said, is like gangrene. Ask God for forgiveness, and let us ask God to protect us from shipwrecking our faith. All right, guys, I love you. Be blessed. Bye.